Hello, everyone. So thank you for joining us for today. We want to use this opportunity to talk about some of the lessons learned that we've encountered working with our members in this current situation, trying to set up a remote IMT. So the presenters today, it won't just be me, but like I said, I'm Dan White. I'm one of the I am the Response Readiness Manager for EMEA. We also have Richard Cooper, one of our response specialists based in Southampton, and Jamie Gaffigal, one of our senior trainers and consultants, also based in Southampton. The agenda for today, the whole point of this webinar today is not to teach you how to utilise IMS at all. It's really for us to talk about those shared lessons that we've picked up during the recent situation where we've been trying to set up remote IMTs and EOCs. So we've had some internal drills ourselves within OSRL, and we've had quite a number of client exercises as well where we've participated. We're going to talk about some of those limitations of IMS working remotely, our specific lessons learned, and also I've asked Jamie to specifically come on this call to talk about OSRL's experiences of using some of the various platforms which are available, such as MS Teams, Skype, Zoom, etc. So the first slide really is over to Richard, and he's going to talk about the principles of IMS, just to get us started, really.
Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction there, Dan. And yes, mindful of what Dan has been saying there, we're not really teaching you all how to or what IMS is in a detailed sense, but just to give you a sort of brief overview of what IMS incident management systems are and their guiding principles. We've taken these principles, what you see on the screen here, from the good practice guidelines produced by IPECA and the IOGP. You'll see a link there at the bottom of the page, and I believe that will be provided to you at the end as well. The reason that we have, or that IMSs exist, is we're mindful that major incidents are complex, and they may involve a large number of organisations working together, trying to achieve the same goal in the face of situations that may be complex, rapidly changing, and have high stakes. So the reason that the IMS is there is to provide a structured approach that can be applied to all hazards, and it should enable these organisations to work together with a minimum of fuss and teething problems, pulling together for the same goal. Particularly those that may even have no experience of working in collaboration before. So the principles here are overarching for all different incident management systems, and there are several that do exist in various parts of the world, but all should have the same rough principles. And they're split here into two streams. First is the organizational principles, so that's how an incident management system should be structured. So what these are here, the first one you see, a single or integrated organization. That means that there is one command and therefore one direction to travel to achieve those goals. Also, organization by function. So what that means is that within an incident management system, there are various different functions, structures, which work towards achieving a particular area of that response, perhaps operational, command, logistics, that sort of thing. And they will all have clear defined roles and responsibilities within those. There is also clear hierarchical reporting, so that you may have heard the terms chain and unity of command before, which is an ICS term. Chain of command means that there's clear reporting up and down the chain of communication, and also unity of command means that there is anybody within that organizational structure can be assured that there is a single, that they have one single person above them, manager that they're reporting to, avoiding a sort of too many chiefs kind of situation. And also, and this is key here, that the organization is what we call modular, so it's a bolt-on structure, and it's scalable to fit the structure of the incident. What that means is that the incident structure can grow.
No.
So the structure can grow and shrink with the incident. It can start with simply an incident commander on their own, but it can grow to a vast organizational structure with thousands of people working towards those goals. On the other side, you see the management principles. So that's directions that we'd give to command to effectively manage the response. First in that there you see is the management by objectives, or objectives-driven response rather. That means that rather than reacting with the available resources to an incident you see, you put in place priorities and objectives which are overarching goals, and you work on those sort of from your objectives out, what you want to achieve first. There's also an incident action plan. So this is an overarching document. It can be delivered in a smaller incident orally by the incident commander, but in a larger incident, it's recommended that it's a written document. And this is a one-stop shop of all the different priorities, strategies, tactics. It should list the resources that are available to be used, record all the tasks that are being given out, and contain all of our priorities and safety messages as well. Next, their common terminology. So that is there crucially to prevent misunderstanding between those different organisations that may well have previously in their own worlds used their own different terminology, perhaps to refer to the same thing, and also includes common symbology as well for visualization purposes. Manageable span of control, that is, it refers to the number of resources or personnel that can be effectively managed by a single manager. In terms of IMS here, the recommended number is somewhere between 3 and 7 people, not either letting the structure get too large that it's not effectively managed, and again, not having it so small that you have too many managers and not enough people operationally working. And then finally, their coordinated resource management. So that's important for providing an up-to-date picture of what is available to the response, what is either in use, and it should be accurate, and it should be updated constantly throughout the response. So anyway, that's, as I say, a very, very high level and quick overview of those principles there. So Dan, I'll pass back to him. He's got some more detailed views of the lessons that we've encountered when we've been trying to set up this structure remotely.
Sorry, I was put on mute. Thanks for that, Richard. So I've got a number of lessons learned which are quite high level here. For obvious reasons, we've tried to anonymise these as much as possible. But I think that the key message is still there. So, really the first one that we've encountered is coming down to platform choice. So there's lots and lots of different options out there from MS Teams, Skype, Zoom, WebEx, WebIAP. There are a huge plethora of platforms that we could choose, but whichever one you choose, I think they will all work, but they have their pros and cons, and Jamie's going to go into that a little bit later on in our webinar. But for now, I guess the main thing that I'm trying to get across here is, whichever one you choose, make sure you test access for all of those participants that need to be able to dial in before you have an exercise or an incident. Whichever platform you select, also you need to consider you don't really want to be using it just as a conference call capability. It needs the ability to be able to store documentation and have a means for everyone to collaborate together on those shared products of work. And what we've certainly found is that MS Teams works really well. It's something that we probably rolled out about a year ago. I know, speaking to a lot of our members, they have either only just started to roll it out or have had it for some time themselves. And the other thing to note, I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this, but Skype is gradually being phased out by Microsoft. Teams is actually replacing Skype for business now. it's really important to make sure that we make the most of that functionality. We don't want to be just using that as a cool functionality and sharing screens. In most of these applications, we have access to that shared documentation, the ability to be able to add tabs with various templates in, and that will make a massive difference to how you're able to set up. And the other really key thing here is to set up a template, or certainly for us within Teams, we set up a channel for incident management, so that we're then able to have a consistent approach for any incident that comes in, and everyone knows where to go to populate that information. So really, the key thing there is they all work to one degree or another. You need to understand the limitations of whatever platform you go for, and it's really important to plan ahead of time and to test that access, especially internally and also externally with third parties such as ourselves and others that you might need to work with during a response. Lesson 2 is all around establishing comms protocols. So it sounds quite obvious, but during a situation like this where we're trying to manage an IMT remotely, communication needs to be managed more carefully than ever. It's very easy for things to be misunderstood, for people not to pick up on some of the important points which are passed across during a call. So. Like I said, it's pretty obvious, but agree a set of ground rules before you start. Agree what type of information should be shared, how you're going to share it, and when you're going to share it. General housekeeping, just like on this webinar, so everyone remain on mute unless presenting. Agree the principles of sharing video. We've worked with a number of members now, and everyone seems to have quite a different policy on this. For our side of things, we certainly see the benefit of sharing video. Yeah, you're able to pick up on people's body language a little bit more. It's less fatiguing, less tiring for you to be able to actually see someone talking, rather than trying to listen down a speaker as to exactly what's being said. And another thing that's worth mentioning, within your own teams, this may not be an issue, but if you've got teams which are going across, several continents and people that don't know each other on a first name basis, then it's absolutely worthwhile having those introductions either when someone new starts talking or at the beginning of an incident or a shift change. That can really make a difference. Other things to bear in mind when it comes to that comms protocol, you may have 7 or 8 different calls going at any one time, depending on the number of activities that you have going. So people need to know what call to dial in on, where they should be, and how you're going to operate there. So quite a bit of planning needs to go into this, establishing that comms protocol to understand how you intend to operate. And make sure that we have those ground rules so that everyone's aware of what you need to do. Situation awareness is again a lot more challenging when we're working remotely. We've certainly found that participants that we've had involved in client exercises, it's really quite difficult to maintain that understanding of exactly what's going on in all the different aspects of the response, especially if you're down just one phone line. So that can be really challenging. So our lesson learned there is to make sure that whichever platform you use, you have a suitable file structure where you're able to effectively set up something similar to what you would see in your incident command post. So, replicating those boards, but online. A really good example would be a recent client workshop we had last week, where the member involved put a significant amount of effort into a OneNote a series of pages which replicated all of the information that you would normally see there, and that meant that everyone that dialed in via Skype in this case were able to go to OneNote and very quickly gain that situational awareness by being able to go to all of the different sections, pages, and effectively, very similar to walking around an incident command post and reading the whiteboards. It was a really useful way of being able to bring people on quite quickly. Because ultimately we need to be able to share documents, work on products, or work together, assign tasks, track actions, all of that kind of good stuff. So if we don't have a means of, via SharePoint, OneNote, or something embedded itself, then you're going to really struggle. I just saw something coming in there from Simon Batten. Microsoft Teams, for example, does have a whiteboard functionality. So we have played with that a little bit, but what we found so far is probably easier for the operators to use is actually just setting up tiles within there with templates which kind of replicate the templates of whiteboards and stuff like that. So specifically in the UK, for example, we have a series of iBoards, we call them, which are effectively table templates, which we're able to then populate, which basically represent that. But yeah, absolutely, you can use the whiteboard function within most of these applications, and it's about whatever works best for you. Where I would see those whiteboards working really well is if you're in a situation where you have access to a smart board and you're kind of replicating what's on that smart board remotely so everyone can see it. Other points to mention, which I think make a big difference, is using liaison officers. So where you're in a situation where you're quite likely to have one main call going and then several other calls going for the different sections to go away and do their detailed work, it's really important to have some form of liaison officer that's able to go between those calls to make sure that information is getting passed back and forth as quickly as possible. We found that if you don't have that, bottlenecks happen, and then the work is very much delayed by those larger calls where everyone's then getting together. The liaison officers make a huge difference in that. Like I say, have a process in place to be able to orientate people when they come either as new participants into the IMT or as you have other people coming in. It's really important to have a means of doing that. So unless you have that file structure in place or a dedicated person who has that responsibility to be able to onboard people, as it were, you could have quite a bit of an issue with trying to bring people up to speed. So that's why we would recommend going down this file structure route, because it would make a big difference. IT, making sure it's fit for purposes. So I think it's fair to say we're probably all experiencing this right now. So, IT challenges can very much make or break your ability to be able to support an incident. Simple things like poor internet bandwidth, general personal issues with your laptop can make a real difference. And what I would say here is, plan for when the IT failure happens, not if. I think it's fair to say we were on a large workshop last week where we had probably about between 60 to 70 people dialed in at any one time. And for me, on that workshop, I had a situation where my internet just completely failed. I had to move location in the end to get internet going again. And then when I did move location, Skype completely failed and I had to have that reinstalled by our IT department. So it's entirely possible that these things will happen. And I wasn't the only person that had pretty major IT issues on that workshop. So it absolutely happens. And I think it's really important that we build in that redundancy into your IMT structure, knowing that those failures are going to happen. So, and a really good example would be, making sure that you have your deputy section chiefs plan to dial in on those same calls, so that if you have a silly issue like you suddenly lose bandwidth and you drop off the call, the deputy can take straight over and continue that brief. So you're not then wasting everyone else's time on that call and you're not able to report back. We need to consider the local infrastructure. So normally, in the vast majority of the world, we have pretty decent, reliable internet. Right now, that's not quite the case. Certainly where I live, for example, there are periods during the day where the internet bandwidth completely drops off and I struggle to maintain a conference call. So we need to consider that, especially for some of the locations that you would be operating in. And it's not just the bandwidth that's the issue. Everyone's working remotely with laptops. There can be a lot of upskilling required to get people to start using new software packages such as Zoom, Teams, etc. So it's important to bear that in mind. Managing a remote team, so pay special attention to managing energy, fatigue, concentration, stress, and well-being. So this is quite easy to say, but I actually do think this is probably the hardest lesson for us to learn. It's something that we picked up on quite early on in one of our drills, and to be completely honest with you, we haven't fully actually embedded that lesson yet. We still keep on falling over to the same pitfalls here. So it's something we need to talk about frequently and keep on going back to and trying to make sure that we embed that into how we operate. I mentioned this briefly earlier. So the degree of concentration is needed is much higher than it would be if we were face to face. Equally, if you're on a call where you only have audio rather than people sharing their videos, again, that concentration level peaks up a little bit again. So bear that in mind with what you're doing. I know some companies have a policy where they don't share video at all. But what I would say is if you can at least have the people who are presenting at that point share their video, it will be a lot easier for those listening to pick up on the nuances, and it'll be less fatiguing. We need to make sure that we build a structure into that operational cycle that enables people to take screen breaks. We're able to make sure that people can get up and go make a cup of tea, use the facilities, etc. If you consider yourself in a command center, more often than not, those natural breaks occur. There might be someone else that can bring you a drink, for example. When you're at home as and fulfilling one of those key roles, you'll find very quickly that you're in a situation, if you don't manage it, where you're literally bouncing from call to call and you have no time to go and do anything like that. So we really need to get ahead of the game and make sure that we're managing that. The other thing, two other points here that I think are really worthwhile talking about is assign a buddy system. So there's a number of ways we can do that, but by having a buddy system, it means that you've got someone that can basically go in and help you delegate tasks. It means that you've got someone that's checking on you to make sure your fatigue levels are and where your levels of concentration are. And the other side of it as well, which I think is quite an interesting thing that we spoke about on a recent workshop, is that where we're supporting remotely and we may not be able to get people into country straight away, we can utilise a buddy system so that we'll be able to provide that remote support from your home base. So that's an interesting point to take away as well. Encourage participants to indicate their availability status. So I think this is an important one to talk about as well. So when you do step away from your screen for whatever reason, have a means where you're able to indicate your availability. So if you're just using the chat function, for example, just using an emoji to say that you're stepping away for a little while, or just quickly be right back in 5 minutes, people then know where you are. And we're able to understand exactly what can happen at any one time. I think that will help everyone manage what's going on. Facilitation. I think this again is quite an interesting one. So for the IMT leader, it's going to be very difficult for them to monitor progress of exactly what's going on while still trying to do their day job remotely. So facilitation is something that I know some of the IOCs are already starting to embed into their RRT, for example. But what we would say in this scenario, it's even more important than ever that we have someone dedicated to that role, because they're in a situation where they'll be able to dial in on all of the different calls, hop from call to call, get a feel for how the incident is going on, guide those various groups as required, and take some of the heat off of the some of those senior positions within the IMT, so that they're able to focus on the specific job at hand. So we really see some value in that. Other things that are worth considering, ensure that people have alternates, so that you can, so that they can provide support again, and it enables them the primaries to take a break as required. And on some of the smaller incidents where you wouldn't normally have a document controller, in this remote scenario, it's probably worth bringing them in anyway. Because it's going to be more challenging, so you'll have a bit more control over what's going on, and be able to keep progress a little bit better. So the final lesson learned really on this is, a virtual IMT is still an IMT. So we had an example of an exercise we did with a client a little while ago now, where the entire IMT was effectively run over one single long open call, which sounds like it would work, but in reality what it created was some pretty significant bottlenecks and confusion over who was responsible for what aspect of that response. So our recommendation here is to set up separate calls for the various sections to go away and do their detailed work. The other really important thing here is to bear in mind is that if the only support we're able to provide during that initial mobilisation period is via one call, then that's a significant bottleneck for OSRL support to you. What we advocate is as quickly as possible for us to be able to try and get on a function to function basis, so that we're able to put people in planning, in logistics, in operations, etc. So they're dialed into those calls, and by doing that we can significantly increase the level of support we're able to provide. And we did that last week on a workshop with one of our members, and that made a significant difference from day one where we didn't do it to day two where we did do it. So we'd strongly encourage that, and that's probably one of the best things we can do for you right now in those early stages before we'll be able to put boots on the ground. And a really important thing here is all of this comes down to planning. So the more practice we do now ahead of time, the better off we'll be if an incident comes in. So this is different to how we're normally managing a response, because we're trying to do it remotely. So understanding how we're going to share information, where all of the information is going to go, and what templates we're going to use and how things might be different is really important. So we need to get on and practice that ahead of time. I'll say this again later on, but we're here to support. We've worked with a number of our members now to support their internal exercises, but we haven't heard from quite a few of you, and we'd like to, so that we can test our capability, and the remote EOC, which is our Emergency Operations Centre, sort of procedures that we've set up. But equally, we want to help you get yours set up so we're all in a better place. So this sort of brings us on to hopefully a bit of feedback from yourselves now. I've spoken about a few of our members which are doing this, who we've been involved with so far, and I've tried to incorporate some of their lessons into these 6 lessons that we've just shared. But is there anyone else on the call where you have some lessons that you'd be willing to share of where you've been trying to implement a remote IMT? over the last few weeks. Definitely silence. So I know. Swee Hung, I think we've got you on the call. You were involved in the workshop we did last week, and I know you had some really good feedback points in the debrief session we had. Is there anything specifically you'd like to add that I may have missed from that debrief session?
Sorry, I just have to figure out how to use it on my iPad.
No problem.
I have actually mentioned quite a lot of them. The key for us, I think, is actually having a more structured schedule for throughout the whole exercise period. In our workshop, we set up, a lot of persistent chat in Skype, and we also have separate Skype meeting. Lock in for the different sections, but then I think one thing that we do realize that is that individual, especially because I was as one of the liaison within different sections, I basically have to look into the different section persistent chat. I have to go into a different Skype call just to try to find out what is happening. So that actually quite taxing for the individual and probably not as effective as well. So throughout the, I think towards the halfway through, we sort of agree to say, hey, let's just have a chat among the liaison so that we can just pass informations. I thought that actually helped us in terms of passing information and sharing information across sections. And then obviously with the OneNote being available to everybody you can then go in to see which are the sections that you are interested to find out more information. It actually helps in terms of collaboration. So I think making the tools and also think through what you want to communicate, how you want to communicate before as part of your exercise design, which can then be used for a real event, that will be very useful. I think that is probably the biggest one. And then because the exercise that we had, we are simulating the situation where the regional response team looking at how we can support an affiliate. So in the current COVID-19 situations, it's really thinking about, you have to balance the risks of bringing in more people and causing probably more logistical challenge to the affiliate or local team by really scrutinize what is the benefit that you can bring in to support your affiliate in that case. Mm-hmm. So really think hard about what is your unique offering that you can't actually do it remotely. So really think hard on what you can leverage on to do a remote support and who should really be in country. And I think the buddy system that you mentioned earlier is one way that I think our affiliate actually find, hey, that could be a solution, even though it required more resources, but it could be a way out to bring us out from this current COVID-19 where physically people, a lot of them can't travel.
Yeah,
I think that's it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Swee Hung. It's probably just worth mentioning, I don't think Mark would mind us sharing this. So we had a day and a half workshop with ExxonMobil last week where, we've got lots of really good information on OSRL's website at the moment about how we're able and ready and willing to respond. But this workshop was a further step beyond that, really, to say, okay, well, how do we actually do that? And we focused specifically during that workshop on how we would mobilise, a joint team of OSRL and ExxonMobil RRT, into Nigeria, Angola, and Cameroon. So, that was really going away and working the detail of exactly how we might go about doing that during a response. And in the next week or so, probably 2 weeks realistically, Exxon have agreed that we're going to be able to share those anonymised lessons learned from that workshop. So that's a really good piece of work which we'll be sharing in the not too distant future. I'm conscious we've got some other people on the line that I know have had exercises, but Simon Batten, I'm not sure if you were involved in the recent BP shipping exercise that was based out in Singapore at all. But if you do, have you got anything you wanted to bring in from that at all?
Yeah, sorry, Dan, I wasn't involved in that one because I deal with the upstream business, not the shipping side.
Okay, sorry. All right, thought it was worth a try. Does anyone else have anything they wanted to raise?
Yes, Daniel, it's Lars from Equinor.
Oh, hi, Lars.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the interesting reflections and lessons learned you share with us. I just like to mention that DPN, that's the Development Production Norway, operating on the Norwegian continental shelf. They had actually, 3 weeks ago, they had a remote mustering. It was a minor oil spill at the statue area. And they worked with 16 people for 48 hours. And it was doable. One challenge is when you start to put up a lot of Teams channels, you could go into a trap that you don't know where you are. So they also utilize Skype. They had one channel for the whole IMT, and there was a difference, and they muted, and they used Skype to talk with command, to talk with authorities, etc. So it is doable, but as you say, you have to prepare for it. And in Norway, we are happy to have a tremendous, well and good broadbands. We also set up a GIMAT, that's also Global Incident Management Assist team, who are prepared to operate remotely. We're going to test that out with an exercise in the coming weeks with Canada. We're also discussing how to get support, remote support, when we are starting to using the IFP tool, because we need experts to support us in our large incidents. So, yeah, thank you. And by the way, your website is very good and functional. I like it. You're muted.
Sorry, my child was screaming in the background, so I thought it best to mute. So, is there anything else that anyone else would like to bring up? I'm just conscious that this is where the real value of this webinar is the information coming in from those other people on the call. So, if there's anything else, now's the time. If not, we'll move on to the next couple of slides. No. Okay. In that case, then, thank you very much for that. That was some really good points there raised by yourselves. So appreciate that. So back over to Richard, really, just to sort of wrap up the top and tail of the presentation on the IMS principles and some of those limitations that we might find from those IMS principles working remotely, and then Jamie will wrap up with some of the experiences we've had of the different software packages that are available.
Okay, thanks again there, Dan. Yeah. As alluded to there, this is sort of on top of the lessons that we've specifically learned from our exercise over the last few weeks, and delving more into the specifics of the mechanics of how IMS works here. So, as I alluded to earlier, information sharing is, as I'm sure you can understand, key to making incident management systems work. And in the remote world, a potential limitation of working remotely is that information sharing can start to break down, either through technical issues or also just from a lack of situational awareness. And I've split it down to two separate points here, but really they kind of work together. That less informal communication, looking at the third point. Formal communication, if we're familiar with ICS or other IMSs, you'll be familiar with the formal communications. You know, we all have that image of the forms that you have to fill out. But what can really grease the wheels is informal communication, which is teams working together or within a physical IMT, simply walking across the room, passing information between you. And of course, if you're working remotely, then that is not available to you. So there are, as Lars kindly mentioned there are other ways of doing that through Skype and through Teams, but it's less intuitive. So that's something that needs to be in the back of everyone's mind when we're coming to this. Also, that point in enforcing ground rules. Ground rules are formalised. Ground rules are put into every sort of IMS meeting, which are things like not talking over one another, keeping your phones in silent. Dan, I think, has covered that pretty well already about that being a problem with remote. And as we become more familiar over time with this, I mean, from a personal perspective, I know that I wasn't as familiar with this kind of online working prior to this, but we all become more familiar. That should smooth itself out a little bit, but it's always there. And also technical barriers, so that's internet outages, not knowing the particular software, perhaps requiring more training on something than they already have. And then finally, that visualization of structure, again, similar to what Lars was saying about there being lots of different rooms, not perhaps knowing where you are supposed to be, but also knowing where you are within the structure of the organization. Again, this is a difference between a physical IMT and an online one. In a physical IMT, you can see where you are supposed to be within that structure. You are in a particular, either in a room or an area within it, and there are clearly defined, boards, places that are signposted towards you, where you might sit within that structure, which isn't available to you when you're sat on your own at home. It's more of a mental hurdle perhaps to overcome. So just some thoughts from me there on that. Anything more to add from Dan?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you, Richard. In that case, I think we move over to Jamie now for the last few slides. I'm conscious we are overrunning a little, but I really wanted to make sure we made the most of the global, everyone on the call to get their feedback.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so I'm going to run through some of the platforms that we've been looking at, that we've been experimenting with, so how we can best utilise the different potential that they variously offer. Next slide, please, Dan. Okay, so there's just a couple of the scenarios and the examples that we've had to work within, or that we've been working within over the last few weeks. So initially, as we were trying to work out how we could run a mobilisation from our EOC, but do so remotely, we ran a few internal mobilisation exercises. And obviously, as with anything, there were a few lessons learned from those. We were then able to take those into external exercises. So we worked with a couple of operators to run through a pretty much real-time mobilisation. And again, a few learnings from those. We've run several webinars such as this, and obviously what we're looking to do today is a little bit more simplistic than something like a mobilisation drill with an operator, and also just remote training delivery. So I'm in the training team at the minute, and that's been our key focus for the last 4 or 5 weeks really, is looking at how we can take what we generally deliver to real-time groups, whether it's people coming to one of our training bases in Southampton, Singapore or elsewhere, or us going to your location, and actually converting all of that and translating it to an online platform. And obviously, across all of these, there are some elements that work fairly intuitively, fairly simplistically, just to take what we were doing previously and then move it to an online-based system. But there are a lot of other aspects that really need to be either redesigned, or we need to take a step back and think about what we're trying to achieve, and therefore maybe revisit how we are getting there. So the 3 systems that we internally have looked at most closely there, we've got Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams and Zoom. And they all offer different strengths, different advantages. So for example, Skype, I think speaking generalistically, there's probably a greater level of understanding and familiarity with Skype. At the minute, a lot of what we're doing has had an element of trial and error to it, as we're trying to test or expand upon what we and what our the different stakeholders that we're working with have been doing on a remote platform previously. Whilst we're doing that, trying to integrate or adapt to a completely new platform, that obviously adds a few more unknowns, a few additional stresses that may not be ideal. So we are considering the potential value in moving to a new platform at the same time. And obviously part of that is the ease of use and learning and how intuitive it is, and also how long we expect to be doing this for. Certainly for some of these scenarios that we're looking at there, it's something that's obviously critical in the current situation and the coming months. But potentially there'll be a lot of value in really expanding and improving upon the way that we can interact with other stakeholders and members on a remote basis in the longer term as well. So looking at Skype, for example, as I mentioned, we've got generally a bit more familiarity with that platform. And actually there's a lot of functionality there that we didn't necessarily utilize to its greatest extent. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of our members as well. So there is greater levels of document sharing and collaboration that is available in Skype than you might have utilized previously. But generally, I'd say that does need a separate document management system, so something like SharePoint to sit alongside it to really allow that full level of interactivity. Microsoft Teams, as Dan mentioned there earlier in the session, there is this ability to set up multiple channels within a working team and all to collaborate at the same time onto a set of working documents. So this can really house everything that you're trying to achieve, and you can have multiple working groups within those teams. One issue you can then start to encounter with that, and similarly with Skype, you can obviously have multiple conversational threads within Skype that have got different people, different groups of people that you're looking to work with. Lars mentioned the difficulty in managing those. So you can easily have 5 to maybe 10 different threads that you're trying to work within, and making sure that you've got the right people and the right information is being shared across the wider group can be a little bit difficult when you're trying to manage multiple channels like that. One of the advantages we've seen with Zoom is the breakout rooms. So the ability to take your core working group and then allocate any number of people, so it could just be, say, 4 of a 15-person incident management team, off into a side group, and then that gets their complete focus for a fixed period of time. There's pros and cons to this. So they are relatively isolated within that room. So it's excellent for getting a discrete package of work done. It does minimize your interaction with the other members of the team. So where you might have, in a real-time IMT, you might have a small working team, maybe in a breakout room or in a corner of your emergency response center. You would then still have, and you retain the ability to interact with other people in the room. With the breakout rooms within Zoom, you do lose that to a certain extent. Okay, Dan, next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, all of these have got their different strengths, and some of the issues that we've identified, we've got up there. So first of all, IT permission. So this is something that OSRL, we've been working very closely with our IT teams to make sure they're happy with what we're asking them to allow us to do. And they're obviously working to understand why we're looking to do certain things or use certain packages. So for example, we've worked with a few members and we found that some, because of the encryption issues, some are not happy to use Zoom at all, for example. Some can use it, but aren't willing to share confidential information. And obviously in the nature of response, we need that ready communication and that exchange of documentation. So something like that obviously throws up a few really undesirable hurdles, which are just going to complicate that response and that interactivity. Also being able to download the desktop version of any software that you're looking at. So some of the key functionality of Zooms that of Zoom that is really beneficial when we're using it to its full capacity. That's only available in the desktop download of that system. So you can use it in your browser or as an app on a tablet, for example, with fewer IT security issues. But then some of that functionality you lose. So that's a bit of a trade-off there. I mentioned that ability to have side conversations. It's really important to maintain that informal communication, so not being locked down to one particular channel. And all of these, they offer the ability to do that. It's maybe just a less intuitive process to set up those communication channels. So it's something that you maybe need to have an administrator just to ensure that there are those various working groups that are there and are available. The next couple of points there about file sharing and interactivity, those really go hand in hand. So obviously in any incident response, interactivity and the ability to collaborate with your colleagues and with external stakeholders is really, really critical. Being able to share documentation essentially in real time. This is something that all of these platforms offer, but as I mentioned, we've either seen security issues, or there can be issues with Skype, for example, that a document is shared but less able to collaborate upon than if it's with Teams, what we found. E-whiteboard is something that's really important. So being able to work on a particular document obviously offers its particular advantages, but just having a blank sheet to work with and bringing everyone together to contribute to that e-whiteboard or something similar, that's really critical. And all of these platforms have that function. I think really the main thing is just making sure that you do utilize it. In any emergency response center, you typically have blank space, whether it's flip charts, wall charts, or even a screen that's dedicated as a general kind of OneNote page. And just making the conscious effort to retain that function is really critical. As Dan's mentioned, we've also seen bottlenecks potentially in the support that maybe the OSRL can offer to an IMT if there is just that one channel. So making sure that we are aware of the multiple communications lines that need to be set up. And obviously this is something that can generally be identified in advance and therefore set up fairly readily once we are aware that we want to do so. And then again, we've got that span of control, which Richard's alluded to regarding the principles of IMS. Again, it's something that within the different platforms, you've got the ability to break out into those separate teams, so you can manage that span of control. You can certainly make sure that everyone is clear in terms of who they're working with, reporting to. But again, it can just be a little less intuitive than working in a real-time emergency response center. So it just needs that conscious effort to curate and ensure that it's working as it should be. I think the main thing for us is that obviously we're working with a multitude of platforms there. And while there are different platforms that we're favouring for various functions, when we're working with our members, we obviously need to be flexible enough to work across a wide range of platforms. So really that's one that we've been very keen to proactively identify. What can yourselves use and what are the limitations within the IT permissions or the infrastructure you've got in place, for example. Okay, I'll pass it back over to Dan.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Jamie. And just to reiterate that, OSRL's principle here is that we will use whichever platform we need to be able to integrate and work with our members, and that's great. So thank you for that. I just final slide now on any questions that you may have from anything from any of the topics we covered during this webinar. So if anyone's got any questions, now would be a great time. Just while we're waiting for people to raise those questions, I've put a few other bits on here around further reading. So that link there at the top of the slide is our landing page for the OSRL website with all of our information reference responding during this COVID pandemic. On there, the landing page brings you first of all to the response readiness dashboard. So that's an updated ArcGIS dashboard of all of our response capability, including personnel which are available at any one time. which is a really good tool. There's also the latest members updates, membership updates there, country specific plans, exercise reports. And if you go under that exercise reports link, there is also a document which sits alongside the lessons learned that I've covered today, and that went live yesterday. So that there's actually a couple more lessons in that document than with a bit more detail than what we've covered today. So that's worth a read too. And we will keep all of this updated as we do more exercises and drills and we learn more lessons. So that will be updated periodically as well. Really appreciate you taking the time out to dial in on this webinar, and especially to those that brought some of their lessons learned forward as well and were able to talk about that. It's really appreciate that. That makes a huge difference to these sessions. So I really do appreciate that.